interested in the metaverse. Also, as we've been talking about for years, the line between celebrity and influencer has blurred, because even though there were separate lists for each, there was definitely some overlap with certain celebrities counting as influencers. And regarding that, you had Emma Chamberlain taking that top influencer spot, beating sort of the mainstream stars like Kanye, The Rock, Zendaya, and then you had Jadion closing out the list. And very notably, the report mentions that figures like Kylie Jenner, David Dobrik, and Charli D'Amelio fell out of the top 10. And David's fall is especially notable because he was actually the #1 influencer just 2 years ago. And if you just look at his main YouTube channel, he's still pulling 5 to 7 million views on his regular videos, which leads me to believe this isn't some sort of situation where an influencer is like falling off, but rather their audience is growing up with them and they're not picking up young people at the same rate as they were. Also, while I want to mention that these surveys usually talk about celebrities and influencers and entertainment, the report also looked at social causes of interest for the group and found that Ukraine invasion took the #1 spot, followed by the environment, racial equality, gas prices, and inflation. But ultimately, I do want to pass the question off to you, whether you're Gen Z, a millennial, or whatever. What are your thoughts regarding this survey? And then, one of the biggest things that happened while I was out yesterday, Ketanji Brown Jackson officially became the first Black woman ever appointed to the Supreme Court after being confirmed by the Senate. The final vote was 53 to 47, with 3 Republicans joining all Democrats in this historic confirmation. With those 3 votes not unexpected, Senators Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, and Mitt Romney of Utah crossing the party line. With the vote succeeding, you see Mitt Romney applauding the confirmation while his Republican colleagues leave. And of course, with this, we saw Democrats cheering the move as a major step. Representative Ayanna Pressley tweeting, "Watch your step, concrete ceiling just shattered." Others noting how important her confirmation is for representation, like New York Attorney General Letitia James, who wrote, "Today, history was made. As the first Black woman confirmed to the U.S. Supreme Court, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson is an inspiration to millions, including Black girls who will finally see themselves represented on America's highest court." But on the other side, we saw Republicans continuing their effort to paint Jackson as a radical judge whose appointment is all part of Biden and the Democrats' far-left agenda. And if you're wondering why on such a sure vote, Republicans would just continue hitting on the situation, trying to make KBJ sound like a baby eater, it's all about the midterms, baby. With it maybe being most obvious, with Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell saying in remarks on the Senate floor before the vote, the far left got the reckless inflationary spending they wanted, the far left has gotten the insecure border they wanted, and today the far left will get the Supreme Court justice they wanted. And it makes sense that Republicans are using this strategy. Back in 2016, when it was Trump versus Clinton, while obviously there were a number of things happening, there was a big aspect of the next person gets to nominate a Supreme Court justice. And obviously over the last 4 years, we've seen what a massive impact that has had. I mean, it's generation changing. Right now, if you look at polls, Democrats are far less motivated about the midterms than Republicans, seeming very likely, unless Democrats can get a fire lit under their bases ass, that Republicans are going to retake Congress. And that's incredibly notable, yes, in general, but also for the next 2 years of Biden's presidency. Because in an interview last night, Mitch McConnell would not pledge to consider a nominee to fill a Supreme Court opening in the final 2 years of Biden's term, which also should not be surprising. When Obama was president and he nominated Merrick Garland after Scalia died, there were still 11 months of his term left. So same shit, different day. From that, I want to take a quick second to thank the fantastic sponsor of today's show, Vessi. Vessies are lightweight shoes that are even perfect for the winter because they actually keep your feet warm and dry through rain, snow, and mud. That's to say, they're built for everyday life. I'm constantly in Vessies running errands, playing in the yard with the kids, and I love their weekend Chelsea boot that I can dress up for business or for date night with Linz. And with their revolutionary technology, Vessi makes a truly versatile shoe that is 100% waterproof and snowproof without sacrificing comfort, breathability, or style. The perfect shoe for hikes in LA and on my winter vacations. And how does Vessi accomplish all of this? They make their shoes with Dymatex material, a dual climate knit, keeping you cool in the summer and warm in the winter, and with antibacterial insoles, they're always fresh. They're always coming out with new designs and colorways, so head on over to Vessi.com/DeFranco right now and be sure to use code DeFranco for $25 off. Grab a pair now while they still have your size and you'll be thanking me later. And then we've got the massive news that Canada is building a border wall around their housing market, with Canada taking a drastic step in curbing soaring home prices yesterday after their finance minister proposed a budget that included provisions banning foreigners from buying homes for 2 years. And on top of that, the country plans to spend billions in an attempt to encourage new buildings for Canadian buyers. And this is huge because if you don't know, Canada is one of the most expensive housing markets in the world. And since February of 2020, home prices have skyrocketed by 50% on average. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government is already worried about backlash from soaring prices, but coupled with inflation, there are real fears among his party that they could see serious losses if opposition parties are viewed as offering more to handle the crisis. Now, that said, this is coming from the government, so of course there are loopholes in the rules, where it won't apply to foreign students, workers, or permanent residents, which is probably why Finance Minister Freeland has other proposals in her budget, where beyond largely banning foreigners from buying homes, the government also plans to introduce legislation that would allow allow Canadians under 40 to save as much as 40,000 Canadian dollars or a down payment through certain tax exemptions. And it's possible that with this move, Trudeau will also make good on his promise in last year's election to ban blind bidding, which has been very controversial, which, if you don't know, is the practice that keeps the bid of potential buyers secret, which ultimately encourages them to bid as high as possible, leading to homes selling for hundreds of thousands of dollars over asking. But even if he doesn't do this, the backlash towards blind bidding has been so great that the Canadian Real Estate Association announced that it would start a pilot program that would show bids in real time, kind of like an auction site online. And overall, while the proposed ban on foreigners is likely to prove popular among Canadians, there are concerns that it places outsized blame on certain groups of people. With people like Simeon Papailias, founder of the real estate investment firm Rec Canada, saying, "I don't think prices are going to fall as a result, though I do think it takes away at least some of the competition in what is the most competitive market in Canadian housing history." And adding, "I don't think a 2-year band-aid is going to have an impact on what's a fundamental lack of supply," which is probably part of the reason why you have some saying that there needs to be a cap on how many properties one can buy, as they're being used more as a speculative asset rather than a home. So with all that said, of course, I want to know everyone's opinion, but especially for the Canadians watching, right? I'm an outsider talking about this, looking in, you're living it. What are your thoughts here? Border wall or no border wall? What a polarizing way to stage that question. Then, in international bullshit news, not in that it doesn't matter, but that it's infuriating, let's talk about Mohammed Bonesaw. Granted, some call him the Saudi Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman. The real ones know Mohammed Bonesaw is his real name. Right, he's the guy who totally didn't have Jamal Khashoggi killed, dismembered, and disappeared, despite known intelligence saying Mohammed Bonesaw did have Jamal Khashoggi killed, dismembered, and disappeared. And it's been over 3 years since the Washington Post columnist and critic of the Crown Prince was murdered, and the trial of 26 men who killed him is still ongoing, which I will say that trial was already infuriating enough because you could just see these people as fall guys for Mohammed Bonesaw. But now, in a just outrageous update, it appears that MBS is trying to suppress that trial. And to give you some background here, if you don't remember, following the CIA report that concluded that MBS did in fact order the murder, in 2020, Turkey opened a trial of 20 Saudi nationals, including 2 former top aides of the Crown Prince, with 6 more people being added to the trial later that year. But now, the court handling the case just ruled that the whole thing will be suspended and transferred over to Saudi authorities instead. This is like if I was charged with a crime and in addition to being the defendant, I was the prosecution and judge. But you're putting this super sensitive trial in the hands of the Saudi government that is the one guilty for murdering the very person at the center of the case. Also the same government that carried out a mass execution last month of 81 people whom state television said followed the footsteps of Satan. Well, there's all these bullshit reasons being thrown out by Turkey right now as far as like why this is justified. Many believe this is part of Turkey's recent effort to normalize relations with the Saudi kingdom, which deteriorated after Khashoggi's killing. A move that Human Rights Watch called a scandalous decision, Amnesty International saying it is cowardly, it is spineless, it is a denial of justice, which I imagine Bonesaw said, "Justice? Never heard of her. Did we definitely not kill her in one of our embassies as well?" You know, ultimately, that is the way of the world. Mohammed Bonesaw is getting away with murder. And he's getting away with it because he has the 2 most important things in the world: power and money. That sounds incredibly shitty, but that doesn't stop it from being true. And then finally today, let's talk about major updates to the war in Ukraine as we head into the weekend. First off, today Ukrainian officials said Russia launched a missile strike on people trying to escape at a train station in the eastern city of Kramatorsk, killing at least 50 people and injuring nearly 100 at the time of recording. Ukrainian President Zelensky accusing Russia of cynically destroying the civilian population and adding, "This is an evil that has no limits." We had the Russian Defense Ministry denying any responsibility for the strike and instead saying the accusations were a provocation and implying that Kyiv was somehow responsible. Though obviously that's fucking insane, and beyond that, we've seen reports that a fragment of the missile found near the train station had the words "for the children" inscribed inside it in Russian. The attack also comes as officials in eastern Ukraine said today that Russian forces have ramped up their shelling of the region as part of what they described as preparations for a full-fledged assault that could occur in days. And to that point, according to reports, Russian troops are currently being repositioned in the south and east, with Russian forces having largely retreated from the northern parts of Ukraine, including the outskirts of Kyiv, with the regional governor of the Sumy region in northeastern Ukraine saying that the area is now fully back under Ukrainian control, but warning that it is littered with Russian landmines. So with this, all eyes are currently on the south and east, with officials preparing by opening 10 humanitarian corridors today to connect towns in the region to safer, more central areas. And there's a lot of anticipation in regards to what happens next, especially after some incredibly unusual comments Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said to Sky News yesterday. In what's been described as the first broadcast interview with Western media, he also gave the first indication that the Kremlin sees an end for this war, saying, "Our military is doing their best to bring an end to that operation," which operation is a cute word for the ruthless slaughter of civilians, but he did also add, "And we do hope that in the coming days and the foreseeable future, this operation will reach its goals, or will finish it by the negotiations between Russian and Ukrainian delegation." And very notably here, Peskov additionally admitted, "We have significant losses of troops and it's a huge tragedy for us," which is a rare acknowledgement of Russian losses, and his remarks about the war potentially ending soon are incredibly huge. And they also come as Russia continues to face increased pressure from the West. I mean, just today, the European Union formally approved its 5th round of sanctions since the war began, issuing a ban on coal imports and imposing sanctions on high-profile Russians and 2 of Putin's daughters. That also coming a day after Congress passed 2 bipartisan bills to suspend trade relations with Russia and block oil imports from the country. And while those pieces of legislation largely mirror actions already taken by Biden, they still provide some new elements and are symbolically very important. Which, on the note of important symbolic moves, yesterday we saw the UN General Assembly voting to suspend Russia from the organization's leading human rights body, a move the Associated Press described as a rare, if not unprecedented, rebuke against one of the 5 veto-wielding members of the UN Security Council. But ultimately, that is where we are right now, and there's still the question in the air of when will this end? What can stop this pointless and unneeded suffering? But ultimately, that is where that story and today's show ends. Thank you for watching. I love you.